pretty good team.
That was pretty. It was
What
pretty
made
decent.
that team so good, you two?
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Here's Clark, pulling up from way beyond the logo. Wow. The shot drops, the crowd erupts, and there's that little point afterward, the kind of subtle confidence that says everything without saying a word. That single moment captures what makes Caitlin Clark different. It's not just the range. It's not just the skill. It's the control, the awareness, the understanding of the moment. And that same awareness didn't just show up on the court, it showed up in a place nobody expected, the world of high fashion. Draft night wasn't just a milestone for the WNBA. It became something much bigger. While the league was navigating contracts, visibility, and its place in the sports world, Clark made a move that quietly shifted the entire conversation. She wasn't just preparing to become the #1 pick, she was positioning herself as something far beyond a basketball player. Picture it clearly. Draft night. Cameras everywhere. The spotlight locked in. But instead of the usual conversation about stats, projections, or team fit, something else took over. Clark stepped onto that orange carpet and instantly, the focus changed. Not because of what she said, but because of what she wore. Head to toe in Prada. A clean white jacket, a shimmering silver crop top, a perfectly structured white mini skirt, and sharp black heels. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy in the traditional sense. It was controlled, intentional, and precise, exactly like her game. And here's where things get interesting. Prada had never done this before. Not once. No NBA player. No WNBA player. No draft night collaborations. Nothing. This wasn't a repeat strategy, it was a first move. And they chose Clark. That decision alone tells you everything. Luxury brands don't operate on impulse. They don't take risks without data, without vision, without a long-term plan. For Prada to design a custom look from scratch, before Clark had even played a single professional game, meant something very specific was happening behind the scenes. Creative directors, strategists, executives, they all saw something. Not just talent. Not just hype. Something scalable. Something cultural. And Clark knew it too. When she stood there and told reporters, "Prada has never dressed a draft pick before, I'm the first," it didn't sound like surprise. It sounded like confirmation. Like she understood the weight of that moment before anyone else fully processed it. That's not luck. That's awareness. That's positioning. By the end of that night, the conversation had completely shifted. People weren't just talking about the #1 pick anymore. They weren't breaking down team needs or rookie expectations. Social media exploded with something else entirely. Fashion pages, sports pages, celebrity accounts, all posting the same idea in different ways. Caitlin Clark is Prada. And that phrase matters. Because there's a difference between wearing a brand and becoming associated with it on a deeper level. When audiences stop seeing it as a partnership and start seeing it as identity, that's when something powerful is created. That kind of connection can't be forced. It can't be bought through ads or manufactured through campaigns. It either clicks or it doesn't. That night, it clicked. But that was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, Prada wasn't just reacting, they were observing. Watching how the moment translated. Watching how audiences responded. Watching how Clark carried herself not just on the carpet, but in interviews, in clips, in every piece of content that followed. And what they saw wasn't temporary hype, it was consistency. Because everything about Clark aligns with Prada's identity. Think about it. Prada isn't built on noise. It's built on restraint. Clean lines. Intelligent design. Quiet authority. It doesn't chase attention, it commands it. And Clark? She plays the same way. No unnecessary drama. No forced personality.
But they're not going to do that. And with Noelle Quinn, as you mentioned, no challenge.
Clark.
Just precision, confidence, and control. She doesn't try to stand out, she naturally does. That's rare. And it's exactly what brands look for. So when her professional career began with the Indiana Fever, something else started unfolding at the same time, something most people didn't immediately recognize. Every game became more than just a game. It became a platform. The tunnel walk. At first glance, it looks simple. Players arriving. Outfits. Cameras flashing. Fans reacting. But in reality, it's one of the most powerful media spaces in modern sports. Millions of views, constant circulation across platforms, and most importantly, an audience that isn't even there for fashion. They're there for Clark. And that changes everything. Because every time she walked into an arena wearing Prada, something subtle but powerful was happening. Fans weren't analyzing brands, they were watching their favorite player. But in doing that, they were absorbing the visuals, the logo, the style, the consistency. Over time, that creates association. One game, it's a clean Prada tank paired with structured cargo pants. Another, it's a full denim-on-denim set with a classic black Prada bag resting effortlessly on her shoulder. The outfits change, but the identity doesn't. And that consistency is intentional. Her stylist wasn't just picking clothes. She was building a narrative. A season-long visual story where every chapter pointed back to the same idea: Clark and Prada belong together. And here's why that matters on a deeper level. Traditional advertising is controlled. It targets specific audiences, people who already engage with fashion, who already understand luxury brands. But this is different. This is organic exposure to an entirely new demographic. Young sports fans, casual viewers, people who don't read fashion magazines or follow runway shows. They're not searching for Prada, but they keep seeing it. Again and again. Attached to someone they trust, someone they admire, someone they're already emotionally invested in. That's what makes it powerful. Because attention that isn't forced is more valuable than attention that is. And the numbers reflect that. Millions of views per clip. Massive growth in team visibility. A surge in engagement that goes far beyond basketball. Every single piece of content becomes a subtle form of marketing, but it doesn't feel like marketing. It feels real. That's the key difference. Clark never looks like she's wearing Prada for the cameras. She looks like she's wearing it because it fits her, because it aligns with who she is. And that authenticity is something audiences can instantly recognize, even if they can't fully explain it. And that's what makes this entire situation so important. Because it's not just about one player or one brand. It's about a shift. A shift in how athletes are viewed. A shift in how value is created. A shift in how influence works in modern sports. Clark isn't just building a career, she's building a blueprint. One where performance and presence work together. Where identity matters as much as stats. Where influence extends beyond the court into entirely different industries. And that's exactly why this move is making people uncomfortable behind the scenes. Because if this works, and all signs say it already is, it changes the standard. It means future athletes won't just be evaluated on performance. They'll be evaluated on presence, on marketability, on how naturally they can exist in spaces that were never designed for them before. And right now, Clark is leading that shift. Not loudly, not aggressively, but clearly, one tunnel walk at a time.
Here comes Sabali. Clark.
That natural ease, that quiet, almost effortless way of existing inside a moment without trying to perform for it is one of the rarest qualities any brand can ever find in a partner. In today's world, especially across 2024, 2025, and now moving deeper into 2026, audiences are sharper than ever. They don't just watch, they read between the lines. They understand intention. They can feel when something is being sold to them, even when it's dressed up as authenticity. That's why most brand partnerships struggle to land the way companies expect. They may look polished, they may be expensive, but they often feel forced. And the second something feels forced, the audience disconnects. But with Caitlin Clark and Prada, something completely different happened. It never felt like a transaction. It never felt like a campaign. There was no obvious, this is an ad moment. Instead, what people saw consistently over time was a person who dressed a certain way and kept showing up in that same identity again and again. No big announcement. No forced messaging. Just repetition, consistency, and presence. And over time, that consistency built something much more powerful than visibility. It built trust. That trust didn't appear overnight. It was constructed slowly, across 2 full seasons, through what looked like simple choices, but were actually forming a deeper narrative. Every tunnel walk, every pregame arrival, every clip that circulated online, it all contributed to a growing association. What started as a preference began turning into something bigger. A connection. A cultural alignment. Because when audiences repeatedly see the same pairing without disruption, without contradiction, they stop questioning it. They accept it. And that's when a brand stops being something someone wears and starts becoming part of who they are perceived to be. The tunnel walk wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It became the foundation. Then came the moment that elevated everything. February 26, 2026. Milan Fashion Week. The setting shifts from basketball arenas to one of the most influential stages in the fashion world. And not just any venue, but Fondazione Prada, a space that represents far more than clothing. It's part museum, part architectural statement, part cultural institution. A place where fashion isn't just shown, it's contextualized, interpreted, elevated into something intellectual. And into that environment walks Caitlin Clark. Not as a guest trying to fit in, but as someone who already belongs. Her outfit was a continuation of everything that had been built before. A cropped striped Prada polo, high-waisted tailored trousers, a structured belt, a small top-handle bag, a wool overcoat casually draped over her shoulders, and on her feet, black pointed-toe heels. The same silhouette she wore on draft night. That detail matters more than it seems. Because in fashion, repetition is never accidental. Repetition is storytelling. It's how brands create continuity without saying a word. By bringing back that same heel silhouette, Prada wasn't just styling Clark, they were connecting moments across time. From draft night in 2024 to front row in Milan in 2026. Same detail, same identity, completely different stage. That's how you signal evolution without losing origin. And then there was where she sat. Front row. Not just anywhere, not just in the building, but in the position that matters most. The place every camera points toward. The place that defines who the brand wants to be associated with in that exact moment. Sitting beside her was Eileen Gu, an Olympic champion, a global figure, one of the most commercially successful young athletes in the world. That pairing was not random. It wasn't convenience. It was a statement. Because front row seating at a show like this is never casual. Every single seat is chosen with precision. Brands at this level don't just think about who is famous, they think about what each person represents. Their audience, their image, their trajectory, their ability to carry the brand into new spaces. By placing Clark in that position, Prada was communicating something very clearly, not just to fashion insiders, but to the sports world and the business world as well. This is who we see as our future. This is who represents us. This is who we are investing in. Because being invited into that environment, especially at that level, is not the end of a relationship. It's a signal. In the language of luxury fashion, it's the step right before something becomes official. And if you follow the pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. First, draft night in 2024. A custom Prada look, something they had never done for any basketball player before. That alone was a major investment. Then, 2 full seasons of consistent visibility. No formal contract. No public deal.
And laid it in, she's got 20.
Just presence. Just alignment. Just millions of organic impressions building over time. And then Milan, 2026. Front row. Global press. Positioned beside elite international athletes. Each of those steps costs something. Time. Resources. Access. Strategic attention. And brands like Prada do not spend those things casually. Every move is calculated. Every appearance is intentional. Every escalation is part of a larger plan. Because this is how luxury partnerships are built. Slowly. Publicly. Deliberately. Each step acts as both a test and an investment. A way to measure response while simultaneously strengthening the relationship. And by the time a brand reaches the point of front row placement at Milan Fashion Week, they're no longer asking if the partnership makes sense. They're preparing for what comes next. And what comes next has a name. An endorsement deal. Now, this is where the conversation shifts into numbers, and specifically, one number that keeps appearing: $100 million. At first glance, it sounds exaggerated. Sports endorsement figures are often inflated, thrown around without context. But in this case, that number isn't just speculation. It's evaluation. And to understand why it's realistic, you have to understand what Caitlin Clark actually represents in the current market. Start with reach. Clark's audience doesn't fit inside traditional boundaries. She doesn't just belong to the WNBA. A significant portion of her following didn't come from existing basketball fans. They came because of her. They discovered the sport through her. That means her influence extends beyond the league. It expands the league. And that audience? It's young. It's engaged. And importantly, it includes a large percentage of young women, a demographic that luxury brands are aggressively trying to reach right now. Because here's the reality: the traditional luxury consumer base is aging. Brands know it. They're actively searching for ways to stay relevant with the next generation. But reaching that audience isn't easy. They don't respond to traditional advertising the same way previous generations did. They value authenticity. They value relatability. They trust individuals more than institutions. And Clark delivers exactly that. Without trying. Every time her tunnel walk content appears online, millions of people watch, not because they're interested in fashion, but because they're interested in her. And in watching, they absorb everything associated with her, including Prada. Over time, that repeated exposure reshapes perception. The brand becomes familiar. It becomes current. It becomes connected to someone they admire. From a business perspective, that kind of influence is incredibly valuable. Because it doesn't just sell products, it shifts perception. And when you consider Prada's global position, that becomes even more significant. With billions in annual revenue and a strategic focus on expanding its presence among younger consumers, especially in North America, Clark represents something extremely rare: a direct, authentic connection to an audience they've historically struggled to reach as effectively as competitors. She doesn't just represent visibility. She represents access. And then there's the product potential. After her appearance in Milan, conversations began circulating about what comes next, not just in terms of partnership, but in terms of creation. The idea of a signature Prada sneaker tied to Caitlin Clark started gaining traction. And that idea isn't unrealistic. It fits perfectly into the current market landscape. Clark already has a performance-based relationship with Nike. That exists in the athletic space. But a Prada sneaker would operate in a completely different category: luxury fashion, collector culture, and the growing crossover between sport and high-end design. And we've seen what happens in that space. When brands collaborate across those worlds, the results are immediate. Limited releases sell out within hours. Resale markets explode. Cultural relevance spikes. And most importantly, both sides gain access to new audiences they wouldn't reach on their own. Now imagine that dynamic centered around Caitlin Clark, an athlete who already bridges multiple audiences, a brand that thrives on cultural positioning, a partnership that has been building organically for years before ever becoming official. That's not just a product opportunity. That's a cultural moment waiting to happen. And when you bring all of that together, the reach, the trust, the consistency, the market alignment, the product potential, you start to understand why a $100 million valuation isn't unrealistic. It's not about what Clark has done. It's about what she makes possible.
It's not about your competition, who you're playing. It's about being confident in who you are.
Now imagine this for a second. A signature sneaker created by Prada, but not just any sneaker, a sneaker built around Caitlin Clark. Not just her name stamped on it, but her story, her rise, her identity, and the 2-year organic relationship that has already been quietly shaping the culture. That kind of product wouldn't just exist inside fashion. It wouldn't sit only in sports. It would live in the space between both worlds, a space that, at this scale, doesn't really exist yet for female athletes. And that's exactly the point. Clark wouldn't be stepping into an already established lane. She would be creating one. Because think about what happens when luxury fashion and sports culture collide. We've seen glimpses of it before: limited collaborations, crossover collections, high-end reinterpretations of athletic wear, but those moments were usually driven by brands experimenting with athletes, not building entire narratives around them. What's happening here is different. This is not experimentation. This is alignment. A Clark x Prada sneaker would carry a very specific kind of energy. On one side, you have the precision, restraint, and cultural authority of Prada. On the other, you have one of the most recognizable faces in American women's athletics right now, someone whose influence extends far beyond the court. When those two forces meet, the result isn't just a product. It's a statement. And the demand? It's already there. The luxury sneaker market has proven, again and again, that scarcity combined with cultural relevance creates explosive value. High-end collaborations routinely sell out within hours. Retail prices double, sometimes triple, in the resale market. Collectors treat these drops like investments. And that's without the kind of layered audience Clark brings. Because this wouldn't just be targeting one group. It would hit three major audiences at the same time. First, the fashion collectors, the people who follow Prada, who understand its legacy, who value its design language, and are always watching for the next culturally significant release. Second, Clark's fan base, millions of people who have followed her journey, who feel connected to her success, and who would see owning that product as owning a piece of that story. And third, sneaker culture, the community that lives for crossover drops, that tracks collaborations, that understands the resale game and the cultural weight behind limited releases. When you combine those three audiences into one product, you don't just get demand, you get momentum. And that momentum translates into serious numbers. Across retail, resale, and long-term brand equity, a collaboration like this doesn't just generate millions, it has the potential to generate hundreds of millions over time. Which is why the idea of a $100 million partnership between Clark and Prada isn't unrealistic. In fact, when you break it down, it starts to look like a starting point rather than a ceiling. Because this is bigger than a deal. It's about timing. Every athlete, no matter how talented, has a window. A specific period in their career where attention, relevance, and opportunity all align at once. It's the moment where they can build something that lasts beyond the game itself. The problem is, most athletes don't realize when they're in that window until it's already closing. The ones who do recognize it, and act on it with intention, separate themselves completely. Clark recognized it early. Back on draft night, while the WNBA was dealing with internal challenges, negotiations, and uncertainty about its immediate future, she was already thinking beyond the court. She wasn't ignoring basketball, she was expanding her role within it. She understood that being the number one pick was just the beginning, not the final goal. And by early 2026, while conversations around the league continued and questions about timing and structure remained unresolved, Clark was in Milan. Not as a distraction, not as a side activity, but as part of a larger strategy. She appeared at events. She stepped into spaces that most athletes never even considered during their active careers. She showed up at a golf pro-am, connecting with figures outside basketball. She attended Fashion Week, placing herself in a completely different cultural environment. And every time she did, the reaction followed a predictable pattern. Criticism. People questioned her focus. They asked why she wasn't in the gym, why she was attending fashion shows during important moments for the league, why she was spending time building something beyond basketball instead of staying locked into it. But here's the reality. Those criticisms don't come from logic. They come from expectation. Because when male athletes build businesses, expand into entertainment, or develop partnerships outside their sport, it's seen as smart, strategic, forward-thinking. When LeBron James built his media company while still dominating in the NBA, it was celebrated.
Great job reading the defense. Her hands were...
When Roger Federer aligned himself with luxury brands while winning Grand Slams, it was considered part of his global appeal. When Tom Brady launched ventures across industries during his playing career, it was framed as legacy building. No one told them to just focus on the sport. So when that same energy is questioned in Clark's case, it reveals something deeper. It's not about her decisions. It's about discomfort. Discomfort with seeing a young woman in women's sports operate at a scale that people weren't prepared for, because what she's doing isn't a distraction. It's construction. She's building the parts of her identity that don't rely on basketball. Because basketball, no matter how successful the career, eventually ends. Every athlete reaches that point. And what exists after that moment depends entirely on what was built before it. Most athletes realize this too late. They spend the peak years of their relevance focused entirely on performance, which makes sense at the time. But when the game ends, the attention fades faster than expected. The platform shrinks. The opportunities change. And suddenly, they're trying to build something without the same level of visibility they once had. Clark is doing the opposite. She's using every moment of attention while she has it. Every appearance. Every collaboration. Every carefully chosen environment. It's all part of a bigger picture. A long-term vision that extends far beyond the court. And none of it is random. This is where the comparison to Eileen Gu becomes so important. Gu didn't limit herself to being just an athlete. She built a presence that exists across multiple industries: sports, fashion, business, and culture. She became someone who couldn't be placed into a single category. And that's exactly what made her so valuable to brands. She wasn't just a skier who wore luxury clothing. She was a cultural figure who also happened to be an Olympic champion. That distinction changes everything. Because brands aren't just looking for performance anymore. They're looking for reach, for influence, for the ability to connect with multiple audiences at once. And that requires dimensionality. Clark is building that same multidimensional presence. Her relationship with Prada is one of the most important pieces of that process. Because fashion operates at a different level of cultural value. It communicates identity in a way that few other industries can. Being seen at the right show, in the right seat, wearing the right brand, it sends a message instantly, without explanation. And in the luxury world, context is everything. Who you sit next to, where you appear, which brand you align with. Every detail contributes to a narrative. And right now, Clark's narrative is one of the most carefully constructed in modern women's sports. It started on draft night. It was reinforced through 2 full seasons of tunnel walk appearances. It escalated in Milan. And everything that's coming next is already being set up. Because once a brand reaches this level of investment, once the story has been built, the audience has been conditioned, the association has been established, the final step becomes inevitable. The formal announcement. It hasn't happened yet. But every move over the past 2 years has been pointing directly toward it. And when it does happen, it won't feel surprising. It will feel obvious. Like something that was always meant to be. Because this wasn't luck. Clark didn't stumble into a massive opportunity. She built toward it. One appearance at a time. One decision at a time. One carefully aligned moment after another. And Prada didn't choose her randomly either. They chose her because she sits at a very specific intersection: cultural relevance, audience reach, and authentic style identity. A combination that almost no other athlete in women's sports currently holds at this level. That's what makes this different. That's what makes it valuable. And that's what makes it inevitable. So when the announcement finally comes, and it will, remember this entire journey. Remember how it started. Remember how it built. Because by the time the deal is official, the real story will already have happened. If this changed how you see the game beyond the game, make sure you stay locked in. Because the next chapter? It's coming faster than anyone expects.